Firstly, thank you very much, Mike, for coming to my show.
No problem. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Si.
So, I've gone through your profile and I can see the work that you're doing. I thought to tell about the work to my audience.
Okay, that's good. Um, in order to talk about the work, though, um, where I am doesn't really make any sense unless you know where I've come from. And so, you're an IT guy, right? You do IT stuff?
Yeah,
Yeah, you do Amazon cloud stuff and that kind of thing, right?
correct. Yeah, yeah.
Uh, cool. So I used to be an IT guy, um, but my skills kind of finish about, I don't know, 2010 or so. So my skills are like pre a lot of the cloud stuff and pre the way things are done now. But I used to design, build, install, manage, and then get out of bed for some really huge IT systems used in universities. So these are systems which were used in, globally 24/7. So I have a degree in physics, that's where I come from, and I'd kind of build big IT systems and then install them, make sure that they never went wrong. Because when they went wrong, I'd have to get out of bed, or one of my colleagues would have to get out of bed. And the recent way of kind of building things is that when things go wrong, you just fire up a new one and replace them. But the old way of doing things was you had one or two servers you really cared about, and you made sure that they work. So that's where I started. Um, but then when I had kids, I kind of almost couldn't keep up with the tech, if that makes sense. I'm getting old, I'm 50 now. And so I studied something called systems thinking at a university. And so my work has changed from a really detailed tech analytical world to almost a kind of broad world that looks at how things fit together and how people work and things like that. Does that make sense? Anything about that you'd like to know about? Because I've got so much stuff, but I don't just want to go off and go off at an ankle.
So, until 2010, you worked in IT.
Well, I worked in IT actually till about 2016 because the organisation we worked for had kind of old tech, so they were a little bit behind the times. Um, so I worked in IT. I did, I was I guess the closest thing I'd be like a service reliability engineer. Like you build it, you look after it, you run it, you get
Yeah.
out of bed. Well, I did that kind of thing. But I guess the work you've seen that I do, um, I kind of more do people stuff now, and I do cartoons, and I do trying to explain complex situations really easily with cartoons. Um, I'm just trying to think the best way to explain that. What I found out, um, I was an IT guy. I did, IT work. I was good at it. It's well paid. It was a good job, and my stuff generally worked right. Um, but then when I was about 40, I realised I had neurodiversity, dyslexia. Um, and it turns out that learning tech stuff is really hard for me. It's absolutely, the hardest thing ever. Learning things, learning the people side of things and coaching and drawing actually comes really simple to me because it just makes sense. So I don't know if you know there's a way to learn programming that might say, learn 30 examples in 30 days. And you learn the 30 examples and then you kind of know how to do it. Does that work for you? Is that how you learn? I can't learn like that. I literally can't keep 30 examples in my head. The way I learn is I learn 5 principles. If something has the principles, And then from those principles, I can work out all the examples. And I think that's why I struggled with tech. I really struggled to kind of get all the learning by example. My head didn't have the space to keep them all in. Whereas when I started learning systems theory and complexity and drawing, it's the other way around. You learn some principles of how everything works, and then you apply those principles. So yeah, my work, I'm currently writing a book called How to Learn from Experts, which basically says it's fine learning from examples. You know, a lot of my friends, a lot of my colleagues, you know, they have a brain that kind of can work like that, but some of us don't. So I'm trying to write up how it is that I learn, and then I'm trying to apply those principles to things that I do and that I teach. Does that make sense? There's a lot of stuff there.
So right now you are into understanding system and working on system.
Systems, I mean, because computers are systems, right? You know, you get computer systems and IT systems. The kind of systems I'm interested in generally involve people as well. And once you start to involve people, you generally need a different kind of toolkit to work with them. So if you imagine a computer system, you can look at it and it's a separate thing, and you can almost reach in and change things. I mean, I guess that's how we make computers work. It's the same with cars, and it's the same with plumbing and electrical work. You know, you've got a system that's out there, and you can reach in and you can make it work. With computer systems, with systems with people in, you're in the system yourself. There's nowhere that you're outside of the system. Even if you've been brought in as a consultant, you're still part of it. And that needs all the, you know, computer system things are still true. There is still a computer system there, but there's this messy people system around the outside. And I went from being a techie who thought all systems could be solved, you know, by tinkering with them. And I was good at that, and that's what I could do. And then I realized actually there's another type of system that involves the people, and that's what all the managers do. You know, all the people who don't understand what work they do. That's the work that's the world they're in. But a lot of them, you know, I went from being quite a physics-based engineer who made systems work by tinkering with them and was quite good at it, to someone who goes, oh right, there's some really hard problems out here and they involve people. So as an example, I'm currently looking at some work which is for universities saying, what do we do about ChatGPT? That's not a problem that you can engineer from outside. Everyone's in it. And even finding out what people think, what their opinions are, for example, in a university. And I use cartoons to do that. You know, I use silly cartoons, and I try and use systems and complexity ideas, make them look simple, you know, with cartoons. You know, that's how I work.
So you have done bachelor's in physics, and then you worked in technology, and you're getting great pay in it, and then now your interest shifted on people's thing, how things work in people's thing. Actually,
right.
the people that I interviewed, the technologists, actually they feel very tough to be a people's person, but you are reverse. You actually mentioned that it is easy for you to be a people's system.
That's right. So when I did my degree in physics, I thought everyone found it as hard as I did. but they didn't. I was doing something that my brain really wasn't made to do, but because of I didn't realise. I have a thing where I'll just bang my head against the problem until I fix it. So I did a physics degree when it really wasn't suited. Part of my neurodiversity is I swap numbers around. So I swap numbers around, and yet I've got a degree in maths and physics. So I don't know how I managed that, but yeah, but it wasn't. I was in my 40s when I actually realised that I could understand the people. That there was even having words for what it was. I didn't necessarily have a word for what this whole people thing was. Didn't kind of realise there were books about it. Didn't realise that there were things to learn. So yeah, definitely later in life I went, oh right, I don't have to try as hard. It's still hard, don't get me wrong, but I don't have to try as hard, to learn the people stuff. So, I mean, what that looks like right now, I've moved quite far away from IT, but there's two things I do. One is called, there's a draw your ideas, which is a bit like I sometimes work with PhDs, draw your PhD. And I interview someone and I build a model of what their idea or PhD is. So it's not that dissimilar to like an engine model or a computer model. It's what does it do? What are the details? What happens before? What happens after? Anything else? And you build your way through what they do and you build a model of it. Model in that it's something I can draw. And then you have this, what you can draw, and someone can stand in front of it and point at it, and say, this is what I do. And rather the idea being in their head, and them trying to get the idea out of their head into someone else's head, their idea gets into a drawing, and then they talk about the drawing. So it can be IT related, and it can be tech related, but I do like the people shell around the outside of it. And I also do a course where it's like a 1 hour workshop where I help people to draw, how to start with a blank page. And that's probably quite unlike a lot of your IT people who you talk to. And yet I still know Linux, I still know Vi, I can exit Vi. So, I still know the IT stuff, but not the cloud stuff that's around now. Kind of like the early 2000s, 2010s stuff.
So after working in IT for this much time in your life, so what you have realized and what made you think to do what you're doing now?
Wow, good questions. Thank you. You're making me think. After working in IT, so when I was in IT, I could be quite opinionated, and I thought all problems could be solved with IT, with the IT method. So when we had problems at work, management level problems, I was of the opinion, well, we just need to go and employ someone who's done this before. Find someone who's got the skills, who knows this is a problem. Find someone who's got the skills, who knows how to fix it, who's done it before. Bring them in and get them to do that. That was how I thought. And for computer problems, if you've got a problem with your computer or your car or your plumbing or your electrics, that's exactly what you need to do. But people problems aren't like that. What worked last time doesn't necessarily work next time. Which is, and things are path dependent. If you've got two choices and you choose one, with people, you can't go back and make the other choice because you've already made. So if you've got the choice of, do I train people up or do I make them redundant? If you tell them you're going to make them redundant, you can't go back and change your mind and train them up. Do you know what I mean? Because they no longer trust you. So I learned that there really is two types of, at least two types of problems. And that was quite a big thing because my whole identity was built on, you're good at tech, you can solve problems. So then realizing there was this whole set of problems that I just couldn't understand, that was the motivation for learning. Does that make sense? So I was then, wow, all of this stuff I can learn. And it was easier to learn than the physics, if that makes sense. So I worked at a local university, and a 2-year secondment job came up for drawing, making a visual representation of how the university works and fits together. And I managed to I got that job. So I wasn't completely out, I was still in the same organization, but I went from, using command line tools on Sun servers to using Post-it notes and crayons. And I do drawings for people that, I drew how a whole university department worked. And the cool thing was that they asked me to print the pictures huge and put them on the wall. Everyone could stand in front of the picture and point at their stuff and say that this is, this represents what we think. And, that's quite hard just for one person, getting someone's idea and for them to agree that that's right. It is not easy. But for, a whole university department, I should give myself more credit for that because that's quite hard. So your question was, what did I learn? What's changed? Can you remember what the last bit was? Because I've gone off on tangents a little bit.
So what that strong reason for you to, after coming out from IT and doing what you're doing now?
Yeah, the strong reason was I realized that there was something else to learn. So the way this worked was, I was a bit of a nerd. I used to help run the local Linux user group. So I would like to be around people learning things. And I'd buy books I'd buy if there's a tech book I hadn't read, I'd go and read it just because it's there. I was just absolutely taking in all the information. Then I had kids, and one of them woke me up really in the morning, and one of them stayed up really late at night. And it came such that I just couldn't learn anything for years. I was basically looking after kids, which is fine. That's what I signed up for. But it stopped me learning. And then when my kids started sleeping in and not getting up late, with me finding out that there was this thing I could learn, systems and complexity science, which was a thing, and you could learn it, and there were books, and there were people who knew about it. So I did try and learn tech again, but I'd lost, 6 years. And in those 6 years, everything had changed. To give you an example, I think in 2006, Sun and Solaris started using containers, basically what became Docker. But it was a bit, Sun had invented it, and it was a bit, ropey around the edges. We used to orchestrate containers around our data centers using bash scripts manually. We invented Rancher, but very precise for our particular applications of moving containers around. And there were SAN connections, you had to move the data around with them, and it was all. So 2006, I knew what containers were, and I knew how it all worked. I had kids. When I came back, it was like, no, there's these 50 other new technologies you have to learn. And I couldn't do it because my brain wasn't made for it. As I said, I found it really hard. So there were the two things. I was finding the tech stuff really hard. And there was this new thing that I could learn that I didn't find as hard. And the whole getting older thing and all that together made me think, there's something else. here. As a quick aside, I don't know how well you know Linux, but you don't have to learn Linux via all the details. You can learn Linux by saying everything's a file, even the network, even the screen. There's permissions. Every command does one thing and one thing only, and you pipe the commands together, and that's how you get things done. So with 4 or 5 principles, I could go to Linux and go, I know how to do this. I don't know exactly what the commands are, but in principle, I know how to solve this problem. And that's why I knew how to be a Linux engineer, but I didn't know how to be a Windows engineer, because that's not how Windows works. But Linux, there's some principles. With Unix, you can just follow the principles and you'll get to the right answer. And it was a combination of the tech being really hard and me having 6 years of catching up to do, and something else coming along that just felt easy for me.
So eventually, Linux or managing containers, orchestration, and also the present job that you're doing, understanding the principles and telling principles and creating an architecture for the university and telling how things should be done in order to have a great productivity.
Yeah, that was that, and that changed. An opportunity came up to do a job that was basically drawing with crayons. So I took that job, and then when that job finished, I worked as a business partner between IT and the business. So I kind of had enough people skills that I could talk to people, find out what they wanted, talk to the IT people because they trusted me and I could talk their language and find out if they could do what people wanted. And so I did that bridge. But now I'm full-time, full-time helping people draw, helping people make sense of complex situations. So don't work in IT anymore. I'm freelance basically.
So how do you define yourself? Because you started learning with physics and mathematics, which is completely logical thing, and then you worked in something which is totally logical, and you're trying to communicate with the machine which has no life, and you did that for a long time, called computer and servers, all those things. Then now you are communicating with human beings, and how you define this, the changes that happened.
Well, it helped that it coincided with having children, so there was a whole load of changes that happened anyway. So I was a different person when I came out. But yeah, there is old Mike and new Mike, and there's definitely a change there that I kind of mentally had to go through, which did involve me. So how did that change? So when I was an IT guy, I would very rarely say I didn't know something. If you asked me a question, I would probably give you an answer, and it might have been a bit like ChatGPT. It might have just been, plausible, but maybe wrong. But I would never say I didn't know. I'd go and look up some, but partly that was my job. People would give me IT problems, and it was my job to know. So that's what you do. Nowadays, I'm perfectly happy going, either I don't know that, I don't know enough about your situation. But the kicker is there's another side to that, and that is saying it's not possible to get enough information to know that. That is unknowable. So when I talk about the question, what should we do about ChatGPT? It's not like a physics question where you can't gather all the information, jumble it all together and come out with the right answer. It doesn't work like that. And that's the big difference of me going. It used to be I thought you could gather all the information, mix it all up, put it in a formula, get the answer. But now the question of, what do we do about ChatGPT? What do we do about the next pandemic? What do we do about people stuff? Right down to how do we choose the next content management system? It's not necessarily true. You still have those IT problems possibly at the core of it, but there's a whole messy people problem around the outside. And that's now where I live. How do I define myself? There's not many people, I've not met many people like me who have both the tech, my tech background is getting a bit rusty, but the tech background and then the people stuff. If someone could come up with a name for me, that would be really good. If someone could say, "Oh, Mike, this is what, I've got a name for what you do," that would be quite handy, because even with my work, helping people draw and drawing people's ideas and communication, I don't think there's a name for that. I almost have to invent my own category. But, I wouldn't have it any other way. I don't want to go back to something that's well known. So I don't know how to define myself. I just, new Mike. Yeah.
So actually, when I talk with the people who communicate with the computers or the machines, who work in technology, actually not many engineers are great speakers or people's person. Like,
Sure.
they're not great with talking with people and management thing. It's not easy also, because I remember some engineers that I interviewed. They said, like, it's easy to manage computer because you know what output you will get when you give an input. But it doesn't happen with the people. When you talk something, people talk something else. So you can't expect what responses that comes with.
Yeah, we call it, there's a phrase called dispositional, which means people are generally disposed to things are disposed to behave in a particular way, but they're not guaranteed to behave in a particular way. That's not how computers work. Yeah, you're right. I mean, and making computers do things isn't easy. It's really, really hard. So the skills that, tech people have is, are genuinely hard to get, and it's hard to get them. It's hard to keep the skills up to date. Everything's changing really quickly. It's a full-time job, keeping on top of learning what you need to do tech. And in the same way that I found learning tech hard, I imagine that people doing tech find learning about people hard. I mean, I don't know how that shows up, but I can imagine that I had to put 3 times as much effort as everyone else when I learned physics. I didn't realize that at the time, but I think I had to put 3 times the effort in. And yeah, tech people, I imagine for them, it's 3 times as hard as it is for me. But because I've got a foot in both camps, one of my potential projects is doing a course, workshop, book, webinar on how people work, written for techies. I don't know how big the market or how interested people would be in that. But, I'm a trained coach. I learned coaching. I learned team coaching. I learned complexity science. I learned systems thinking. They're my kind of... and systems. That's a full-time job. Keeping on top of that is just as hard as keeping on top of all the tech. And so I don't think it's possible for one person to do it all. You're not going to be good at it all. So I suppose, I guess I can help the tech people out if they write computer programs for me. Does that make sense? And I think that's the kind of best way to look at it. But yeah, there is from being a tech person who can solve things to understanding that some things can't be solved. For me, was quite a identity change. And so I could see why if people have got the tech identity and they work with tech and they know it works and they work with input, process, output, and it's always the same. I can see why people would be quite daunting and you might just not want to go there.
So your ability is same in both. So how do you say about working in IT and working with people?
So my abilities aren't the same in the both. I could do Linux because it worked from principles, and so I was really good at Linux, and I was really good at if there was a problem that no one could find, I could get a team together and we could find it. But I wasn't all that good at learning new stuff unless it obeyed the principles. If the new stuff obeyed some principles that I could learn, I could understand it. But if the new stuff came with learn these 10 examples and then work out how to do, I couldn't do that because the 10 examples wouldn't fit in my brain. So I don't think I haven't really, I'm not as good at IT. I'm not as good at IT as all my peers were. There was this thing where I worked and I knew that they were different to me. My colleague Dave, I could say to Dave, 3 years ago when you ran that command, what switches did you use? And Dave would say, oh, it was minus A, minus B, minus X47. And I go, wow, how the hell did you remember that? But for Dave, it wasn't hard. That's how Dave's brain worked. Whereas me, I'd have to do it. I'd have to learn. I'd do IT from first principles every time. But because I work with Solaris and Linux, the first principles actually existed. I don't know if you can the service and the way things like that work and the way no code works. I don't know if there's a set of principles that govern everything, or if it's just a lot of different things that work in a particular way because that's how they work. So no, I'm not an expert in both camps, and I am forgetting the IT stuff slowly.
So tell me about the present job that you're doing and which you are good at.
So I'm freelance, so I've got a website that says book Mike now, and you can click on it and you can book my time. And I'm a bit like a coach because I've learned coaching, but I don't do coaching. Some of the things I do is there's two strands. Firstly, the easy one is I can run an hour or an hour and a half workshop with people, or a single person or a group of people, and I can get them to go from a blank whiteboard to having a whiteboard that describes their problem that they can then use to communicate. So that's one of the things I do. And there's I have something called a visual thesaurus. You know how a thesaurus is a book that has a lot of words in, and if you want a word, you look up in the thesaurus. I'm building a visual thesaurus that if you want to describe a dilemma, or if you want to describe a transition, it's just an idea of how to draw it. Because a lot of people, if you communicate just in words, it's really hard. If someone gives you a 10-page document to read, that document contains what's in their head. They read the document, but they don't quite get it. The communication isn't as good as it could be. I can help people do like a drawing overview of what's in the document that helps people communicate better. So that's one of the things I do. And the other thing is that rather than me teaching you to draw and you do all the drawing, the other thing I do is that I do an interview with you, find out what's in your head and model it, and then I do the drawing. And that can be for startups, for businesses, for projects, draw your PhD, draw your ideas. That's a general thing where it won't necessarily look great, but it'll have a lot of information in. A bit like me. It won't be a nice infographic with cartoons and color schemes, but it will be something that you can point at and it represents what you're doing. One of my colleagues still at the university uses a technique like this, just to find out what people want. He uses a similar, we kind of learnt at the same time, he uses a similar set of questions to find out when someone has a problem, what is it that's inside their head? And then he draws it, or he draws it or he writes it up. But then he says, "Is this right? Have I got everything?" So, similarly, he's a tech person, but he deals with people, and he uses similar skills and techniques, and theories that I do, to talk to users, so that programmers don't have to, because he can talk to the programmers too. Yeah, so that carry on, sorry.
Yeah, from 2016, what kind of projects that you did as a freelancer?
So I've only been a freelancer for a few years. As a freelancer, the kind of projects I do are, I drew a university module. So there's a 12-week university module. It has 4 parts. It's on mobile phone programming. And the 4 parts are, you don't get to write a program until the 3rd part. You start writing code at the 3rd part. There's 2 parts before that. And over the module, people learn things, but they also can make mistakes. Like if you haven't done the right sort of research, if you haven't done the right sort of design, your program doesn't work. And I should probably send you a drawing of this so you can link to it in the video. But basically, the picture is like advice from the future. Students who have already done this course made these sorts of problems. And you can point at the picture that shows this problem at this time. So the idea is that that project hopefully helps students learn better and not to make the same problems that people made previously. When I was employed, I drew the university from a top level of how do we attract students? How do we contract with them to join? And of course, we were an international university, so for UK students that was easy. But how do we attract students from India or China or Malaysia? We actually used local companies to help us employ them. Who knew? It turns out not many people knew that. So you end up drawing a big picture of the university and people look at it and go, I never knew we did that. I run the library and I thought the library was a big thing, and it is. The library is a great big thing that I can draw. But as part of the bigger system, it's really quite small. So, that was the biggest project I did. If you can imagine, I'd interview university staff, find out how they did their job, build the model. What do you do? How does that happen? What comes next? And I can also say, so when you do this job, what IT system? And I did that so that they could, you got a big picture of what the university did. And I think my colleague tells me that those pictures are still on the wall in people's offices. People still use those drawings to describe what the place does. Other things I do, I've worked with people writing books because they've got an idea in their head of what their book is. And I've modeled it by saying, what user needs do you meet? When you meet these user needs, how do you do it? What are the things people need to know in order to do the thing that your book's saying? And I draw it out. And we find out that their book might rely on 3 or 4 concepts, and the book might have 3 or 4 tools, and it might have 3 or 4 skills. And when you get a visual picture, it's almost like a visual table of contents. The person can then go off and go, oh, I can write this now, because I know where all the bits go. And that's a combination of, I use my coaching skills to find out what people want. I use the systems and complexity skills to kind of go, how does this fit together? Just those bodies of theory kind of explain how the world works in different ways, some better than others. And then I use my visual cartoon skills to draw a picture. It's really weird talking about this because I'd rather be sat next to you with a picture and I could point at what I did. So maybe I could draw up a picture of what I do, put it online, and then people can look at it if they're while they're listening, and they can kind of see what I mean, really. Thanks for that question.
The seriousness that you have on doing what you're doing in different projects that you said, the same seriousness we have while doing DevOps or cloud or programming or software engineering. It's
the systems engineering stuff. It's the same thing. But systems engineering falls down a bit when you start putting people in, because people don't behave like systems behave. And that's not a problem with systems engineering, but it's also not a problem with people. That's how people are. But you're right. So the systems engineering and the systems theory and the DevOps stuff, absolutely, it's like a well-designed plumbing orchestration, isn't it? So those orchestration theories are exactly the same. But when I'm drawing people's stuff, I also have people theories, so I can do the people stuff as well. One problem I had at work, I can't fully describe it here. It was quite a hard tech problem, but we couldn't even get to solve the tech problem unless we'd solved the people problem first. And that was one of the first ideas that I had, that there was more to it than tech, because the tech people had to gain trust both up the management and down the management to even be allowed to solve the problem. So, we use systems engineering and we used the scientific method for problem solving. It's nothing special. But in order to be able to do that, we had to gain trust with people. And you can't use systems engineering to gain trust. You can't use scientific problem solving method to get people to trust you that you can solve their problem. So absolutely, the DevOps world is a systems world, and it's really complicated and it works, and I have utmost respect for it. But there are problems that you can't solve with those tools. I feel like that's my big thing. You need to use the right tools in the right place. And I guess from my perspective, one of the biggest problems is people trying to use engineering type tools, with people. That, doesn't work. I'm going to say it doesn't work in my opinion. There's so much evidence, it just doesn't work.
I agree with you on that.
Yeah.
And when you came to know that there is a people's person in you, do you know that when you are in IT, or you came to know after coming out of IT?
Oh, it was definitely coming after. And There was a time when you're kind of in a bit of drama with them, and a persecutor way of going, all those people, they're wrong. Now, I've learned this new thing, and all those people, they don't know it. Luckily, I mainly kept quiet because I wasn't, I'm not that kind of person. But in my head, I was kind of going, yeah, they just need to know this new stuff. They're wrong. They don't know everything. So I didn't, when I was an IT person, I didn't just jump to being, to be able to do what I do now. I did kind of go through a phase when I was learning this stuff. But this is brilliant, and this proves why everyone's wrong. I still had that mentality. I don't know. I managed to get through it without losing too many friends, And now as I've hopefully said, it's not that anyone's wrong. Just sometimes they're using the wrong tools in the wrong place. That's the way I look at it now. And hopefully there's evidence that they're using, we can kind of use complexity science to show that there is evidence that they're using the wrong tools in the wrong place. And there is an argument to say why they're doing that. It's not just an opinion. But yeah, that's quite an insightful question. It wasn't like before and after with just a switch in between. For me, there was a couple of years in between when I was going, I don't fully understand this, and I'm not fully understanding this side either. And I was a little bit in between. So maybe something I could do is, help people who are in the same place. But I've only done it once. I only know what it was like for me. I don't necessarily, as I said before, I'm happy to say I don't know the answer. Because it's not that sort of problem.
And how much time you take to solve people's problem if they come to you?
How much time do I take? Well, when I worked in the university, and this is going to sound really funny, it took me about 40 to 45 minutes to talk to someone to get quite a lot of the information about how they did their job out of their head. I wasn't learning about their academic speciality. I was just learning about, how the bureaucracy works, how the systems work. And that took me about 40 to 45 minutes per person. But then when you go on to the next person, you ask them, and they have a slightly different opinion to the first person. And then the next person is another hour. So if I'm working with one person, I can talk to them for about an hour. And then maybe an hour or so of work after that, I can come up with a rough picture of here's what you're looking at. But it will be rough. And if you want it to look nice, all that takes time. But it can be remarkably quick. If it's a single person, I can probably talk to you for an hour, and then I can spend an hour drawing something, and I'll be able to say, is this what you think? And most of it you'll go, yeah, that's what I think. If I have to scrunch together more than one person's opinion, it's just like exponential. I can interview 5 people and then take a week thinking about, drawing. How can I make all this visually appear where everyone sees their own stuff? So yeah, single people, it starts at a couple of hours. Teams, groups, organizations, it's hard, but no two problems are the same. And the workshop I do where I teach people to draw, an hour to an hour and a half, people can be, if you start with nothing, people can be actually confidently communicating with drawing, but they won't know everything, but they'll know enough that they can, be confident.
So what are your people skills that makes you to get the result that you want?
What are the skills? I use something called clean language interviewing. Clean language is a method it actually comes from therapy. And it's a set of questions in therapy that allow a therapist to talk to someone and find out what they think without the therapist's own views and worldview and opinions getting in the way. Actually, I say that it minimizes the therapist's own views and worldviews getting in the way. You can't get rid of it completely. But it's a set of questions that was developed by a guy called David Grove, so that, and he was a proper psychotherapist. He could talk to people and find out about problems they had without his understanding getting in the way. Now, I'm not a psychotherapist. I don't do that. In fact, I don't talk about people's problems as much as I talk about their work. And I don't use the exact clean questions because they're a bit weird, but I use contextually clean questions. So those questions like, what do you do? Is there anything else about that? What happens next? And then if someone says, well, I use a computer, we use a software, I can say, oh, that's software. So how does that work? Where does that come from? What happens next there? And in the same way I've literally done this to when someone's had an idea of an IT system in their head, I can use the same technique to model. You imagine you could model a DevOps system with this. You could start with this live server. How does that work? So what happens before the live server? And what about that? And after that? And you can, with those questions, they're simple, but they're not easy. It's quite hard to slip into, I know best. Oh, I think that too. But if you can keep in that space of asking non-leading questions and using the other person's words, that's the tool I use to get things out of people's heads. And I learned that I learned that by learning coaching, because it's a coaching method. And I don't use it with, I'm not a therapist. I don't use it for therapy. I don't use it for people's problems. I use it for people's, real world stuff. But as you imagine, I could probably interview you about a DevOps system and then draw it. And I will be able to get the stuff out of your head in a way that if you were to tell me, I would struggle to keep up with you. But I'm almost picking the bits out of your head and asking for the next bit, which means that I can then, and the questions I ask, they're based on systems theory. If you're talking about an IT system, I'll be asking systems engineering type questions. If you're talking about other systems, I'll be asking questions that are appropriate for those. Does that answer your question?
So how will you know that subject before asking questions?
I need a contract. So I don't just do this. I absolutely do not strike up a conversation like this. That's, and as far as coaching goes, if a novice coach comes up and starts trying to coach you without agreement, it's really annoying, right? Who gave you the right? So there's a contract where I would say to the academics or someone, we're going to spend an hour, we're going to talk about what you do and how you do it and what you know. And that's enough of a contract that I can then ask these questions. And it also means there's stuff that I can't ask about. If they talk about their colleagues and how annoyed they are with them, I don't have the contract to talk about that. So I go, let's not go there, let's stay here. So it's not like a normal conversation where it might go off in different directions. You end up talking about, personal relationships or stuff outside of work. I'm really strict. We talk about the thing we agreed to talk about and we find out everything there is to find out about it. And that's how I know when I'm, at the end, I show people the drawing and I say, what's missing? And people often, they'll spend 2 or 3 minutes going, but when they say, no, that's it, that's everything, like if I'd drawn up your CI/CD DevOps pipeline, and everyone stood in front of it and looked at the picture, and I said, "What's missing?" And then when people say things, I change it. So that's how I work, really. Just giving away all my skills.
So it's good that you're doing this, and and also, is there any project that made you think so much in the present job that you're doing?
Is there any project that made me think so much? I think it's I need to design a questionnaire for a university department to ask, what do we do about ChatGPT? Because some people think we shouldn't use it at all. Sorry, it's not me. Some people think they shouldn't use it at all. ChatGPT should be banned. Students should never use it. Other people think ChatGPT should be used everywhere. Why not? It's, using computers to do work better. Other people think, how academic references work? Maybe you should academically reference. I put in this prompt and got this answer, and then I did this work on top. And working out a set of because I'll probably only get one chance. People might be happy filling in a questionnaire once, but if I tell them I got a bit wrong, if they're paying me as a consultant, I need to get it right first time. So what I'm doing this week is thinking about that problem. And I'm co-creating it with someone at the university. I'm not doing this all by myself. I'm talking to them, finding out what they need, finding out what their outcomes need to be, outcome related. When you have this information, what is it you then want to be able to do? So yeah, a lot of my work is outcome related rather than saying I've done the process and it's now done. I say, before we do the process, what is it you want to do when we finish this? So right now, that's my kind of main problem to chew over. Academic, and I think every university in the whole world must be having the similar problem, right? What do we do? Because even me, the first thing, if someone asks me for a particular type of report, ask ChatGPT what it looks like, and ChatGPT will tell you, here's an outline of that sort of report. It's for that sort of thing, it is good. But yeah, that's my current thinking project.
So one last question, because you worked in computer side, now you're working on people side.
Yeah.
So you know how the internally how software works, the mechanism, how it is made. At least you have an idea. You may not be working in completely, but you know how things works because of the previous experience of yours. So you have spent a lot of your lifetime in working in IT.
Yeah.
Now you are great at creating system which works for people and which makes people to work on systems called computers maybe. So how this technology or the software should be made with which these people can be use and utilize it in such a way that should be balanced and should be useful.
I don't know. I said there are questions that I don't know the answer to. I don't think there is a single answer. Especially with software, because there's so many different contexts. But if I put my coaching hat on, you start off not knowing, and you start with an open mind, and you ask. And then when you've asked, that's true now, but that might change. People are allowed to change their minds. We do it all the time. and you need feedback. Because if something changes, you have to change something. Usually, not always. If you're making software for a nuclear power plant, you don't get to change your mind about the safety. So there's so many contexts, but I don't think there's one size fits all. But I think where people are involved, you have to talk to the people. You can't. You need to have a representative of the people who is actually really the person. Extreme programming. Are you familiar with that? They have a concept of an on-site customer. So rather than a developer talking to a project manager and saying, "Am I doing the right thing?" they talk to an actual customer who will be using their software. So, whilst I don't know enough or favour any particular methodology, a lot of what XP was doing appears like it's in the right direction. If you're making software for a person, have that person in the office to ask them questions. That's what a coach would do. They would go, "What do you think of this?" And they'll be asking a person rather than a requirements document or a project manager or something like that. Does that work? Is that an answer, or have I skirted the question?
Yeah, I understood what you said.
Yeah, awesome.
And I'll share your web link on the screen. People who finds our video on YouTube can see the work that you are doing and can do work with you as well.
That would be brilliant. I'll send you some links so that people can see what I'm saying. I'll kind of think later today. I'll draw up the answers that I gave you so that people can kind of see. And I'll put them on my website. If you can link to them, that would be great. Yeah, and if you want to work with me, this is what I do. I'm a coach. I do drawing. I do people systems, but I totally understand IT, or at least I totally understand IT from 10 years ago. I'm not quite up to speed, but that's what I do. Yeah.
I'll present your work in the form of text in my website as well. People who finds my website also can see your work and along with the video, this conversation.
That's amazing. I'm not sure what you're going to call me. Let me have a think if I can help you think of a. Here's Mike. He does tech and people systems. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe some of your viewers could help describe what it is I do. If you come up with a good example, if you come up with a really good example, I might use it. That's where I am right now.
Maybe you'll get answer after this.
Yeah.
So
thanks so much. Thank you. Your questions were really insightful, and your listening was exquisite. Thank you. You're definitely on the people side as well, a little bit, I think.
So yeah, that's not your observation I need, because you're a people's person, you're an expert in this right now, and also you worked on computer side. So what do you say about my videos? Have you seen any videos of mine on YouTube?
Well, I had a look. I have to admit I haven't watched them all, but I've watched parts of some of them. Some quite long parts, and it's almost what you don't do that's good. You don't interrupt people, you don't jump in with your opinion, and you don't. You're not. So when I said clean language doesn't interject your stuff, I mean you're doing that. Clean language isn't something magic that people aren't doing. It's just a set of rules that make sure you do it all the time. And so you listen to what I said, because you had to listen in order to ask the question. Your next question is based on what I said. You didn't pre-prepare it. It didn't feel like you pre-prepared it. So you were able to listen, hold what I said in your head as I went on for a couple of minutes. And then when I stopped, you could pick back what I said and ask me a question about it. And that's a coaching skill. If I'm sure you speak to people who can't do that, and you let me speak, and then when I stop speaking, you don't just jump in. You let me have a think if there's anything else. And not everyone does that, right? Sometimes people wait, they'll have a set of questions, and whatever answer someone gives, they'll just go to the next question. And I don't think that happened here. I think you listened to what I said. And then you thought up a really, like the question about the gap, between being a tech to a person, how did it happen? And it took years. You had to have been listening and thinking and paying attention to be able to ask that question. Which is why, when you asked me to appear, I had a look and thought, what sort of questions are going to be asked? And I was quite, I was happy, when I saw that that's what you were doing with other people. This felt like a good place to be.
You are an expert. You are observing me as well, and only you caught me the way I'm asking, and the way I'm observing, and the way I'm thinking when you are saying something. Because most of the time I interview people who are engineers who talk with computers. They don't explain like you said.
Yeah, I'm busted. When you do coaching and team coaching, that's what you learn to do. Literally, the skill that you do is, what are people saying? How are they saying it? What do they mean? And as a coach, you're both doing that and thinking of the next question. It's a proper juggling act, because you can't just be thinking, what's my next question? What am I doing? You've got to be looking at what the other people does and have names for what they do. So one of the things I do with my people, tell me their stuff and I give it a name. Oh, that's this. Oh, that's the other. That's something else. And when you have a name for something, you can start playing with it. So when they have the idea that, there's the thing someone said, and I can pick out arguments, I can pick out evidence, I can pick out where they're inferring stuff, I can pick out where I think there's a gap, where I'd like to ask a question. You are either consciously or unconsciously doing that. Else, how did you manage to ask the question? So either you've done a bit of this training and you've done some coaching, I don't know, or that's just how you are.
I'll share the feedback that you gave about me with my audience, because it's the best feedback that I ever got.
No problem. I mean, thanks for having me on. And this is what I do. I have a whole set of skills, and I'd like to sell them to people. I don't exactly know what words to use, but this is the kind of thing I do. But as well as that, I could probably draw your CI/CD pipeline. Tech and people. I don't know, but yeah, thank you. That's fine. If I think of anything else, I can DM you with it. Or if you've got anything you'd like to ask me about, anything in particular that you're worried about, I can let you know if I noticed anything.
Sure, Mike. Sure, Mike.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's valuable that your presence and your words and your experience and the service that you're doing, sharing this is also extremely valuable. Also, for me, also people who watches this, thank you very much. Can I put this video on my YouTube channel with your permission?
Absolutely, yeah, that'd be great. And I will send you some links that you can put in the description if people want to see the pictures. Yeah, that's wonderful.
I'll put it. Also, can I put this audio and video clip on my podcast, website, internet, social media, everywhere with your permission?
Yes. Most of what I do is Creative Commons. And I'm happy to tell people how I do it as well. Because I don't know, that's how the internet works, isn't it? Yeah, so totally, you can use this YouTube, podcast, social media, no problem.
Yeah. And can you spell your website or your presence, online presence to my podcast listeners?
My website is mikehaber.co. I did forget that, MikeHaber.co. But that will be, if I can send you a link and get that in the description, they'll be able to click on it. But mikehaber.co is the start of where everything is. But I'm on Twitter and I'm on Substack as mikehaber.substack. So you can I'll send you all my social links, and if you could add those, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, it will be on the screen as well. People who watch this interview, they can see all the complete interview. They can see your links also in the description, also in my website as well. Thank you very much, Mike, again for the great time.
I've enjoyed this. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Cheers
sir.
then. Okay,
Bye.
bye-bye.